Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the hinge players in the Big 12, a ton of players that we could have unpacked there, but narrowed it down to a couple that I think are hugely important for this conference this upcoming year. But let's stay with the Big 12 and let's break down some hot takes for some of the conference contenders. There's a ton of stuff to break down in this conference, but we broke down, I believe, 5 of them yesterday and definitely some of the big time ones. But let's get to the rest of this conference because there's at least 10 or 11 teams that can win this thing this upcoming year. And let's start with UCF. And my take here is the amount of transfers that they brought in will actually keep them from competing in this conference this upcoming year. And it's a problem that I've seen kind of just around the Big 12 in general. And I really like this team. I think they took a big time step forward when it comes to talent acquisition and being at a place where you can compete talent-wise with some of the other teams. But at the end of the day, they don't have something that a ton of other Big 12 teams have, which is experience in the system, which is comfort in that system and veteran leadership. And it's something that is going to be hugely important. And Gus Malzahn can absolutely make something happen out of thin air. He's very, very talented and someone that has a ton at his disposal now, which is going to be hugely important. I think the run game is going to be really, really fun with KJ Jefferson, and then RJ Harvey is awesome. Penny Boone is going to be incredible. So it's going to be really, really fun to watch. I don't love this O-line. I think the wide receivers are better, but not necessarily up to the level of the rest in the conference. I think there's this thing going around where a ton of people are going into the transfer portal, and that's all well and good, and some have to do it, and I think UCF was among that team. This is kind of a necessary thing for them to get where they want to go in the next couple of years, but I do think that this year it might just hold them back from being that elite team that they can be, because while Cam Rising knows the playbook like the back of his hand, KJ Jefferson might just be trying to figure out a lot of things going into the first week or maybe going throughout the season. So I think that's the biggest thing I take away from UCF is plenty more talented, plenty more dangerous, definitely a team that is going in the right direction, but a team that is walking a little bit of a tightrope, and frankly, I think it's going to be a little bit too tight, if I'm being honest. But then let's move on to Iowa State, and I have a take about this one. I think this team will have only one loss going into the final 2 weeks of the season, and I think that is going to be just incredible to watch because, frankly, it's not necessarily an easy schedule by any means before the last 2 weeks of the season, but they're a good enough team to knock off all of the teams ahead of them. And as we just talked about, they have dangerous guys all over the place, whether it's Rocco Becht or Abu Sama, who's running the ball, or Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins. There's so many really, really good players on this Iowa State team, and it's finally a team that kind of resembles that 2020 team that Matt Campbell did incredible things with. So it'll be really interesting to watch. Now, the issue is the final 2 games of the season are Utah and then Kansas State. So it doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything if you do get to that point with only one loss, but it at least gives them a shot. There's no two ways about that. And there's 4 games really before that really are going to decide this one way or the other. And it's Iowa, at West Virginia, at Kansas, and Texas Tech. If they can go 3-1 in those games, they're going to be in really good shape. Now, that Iowa game is not going to be easy. It never is. At Kansas is a big-time battle, and then Texas Tech and West Virginia are just going to be 2 very dangerous teams that everyone's going to have to worry about at the end of the day. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this team, but you absolutely have the ability to do this, and if they can, then maybe they only have to split those games in the last 2 weeks of the season to make it to Arlington and be fighting for a playoff spot, which would be very, very interesting to watch. But I really like this team, and I think they're just going to be really hard to forced to make mistakes. I think they're just going to go about their business, make all the plays that they need to make, and at the end of the day, find themselves on the winning side of things more often than not. So definitely a really interesting team and a team that I absolutely love going into this season. But let's move on to Arizona, and let's talk about Noah Fafita that we just talked about not too long ago. Frankly, I think he's going to take a step back in 2024. I think this is a very, very good player, and I think his ceiling is just absolutely through the roof. I just think there's too many things changing for him to be able to keep up that level that he was playing at last year. I think the talent is good. The wide receivers are plenty good, especially with Torrey McMillan. But the running game, I think, is going to take a big-time step back, losing someone like Jonah Coleman is absolutely a huge loss. Losing a first-rounder offensive tackle in Jordan Morgan is absolutely going to hurt. And then I think Jedd Fisch leaving is going to hurt this guy. Although I think he was a huge reason that Jedd Fisch was as successful, I think it's a two-way street. So definitely something that I don't think necessarily helps him going into the season. Now, the good news for Arizona fans is there's not necessarily this need for him to make all of these incredible, awesome plays. And frankly, his B plus football is a lot better than a lot of quarterbacks' A plus football. So he could take a step back and still be a really good player this upcoming year. But at the end of the day, when I look at this offense and I look at this team overall, I just don't see them as the same team they were a year ago. I see them as a little bit more variable, a little bit more dangerous, and one of those teams that absolutely can be really good, but could take a big time step back. And we talked about it earlier, but one of the big things in the Big 12 is that drop 8 defense. You know, they're only going to rush 3 guys. They're going to make you throw into those really tight windows, and it's going to force a couple more turnovers. So it'll be really interesting to see how he kind of goes through this season. But after what was just a magical 2023, I think a step back is more than likely for Noah Fifita this upcoming season. But let's move on to Texas Tech, and let's talk about Micah Hudson. He is a very talented freshman that is coming in for the Red Raiders, and I think he's going to lead them in receiving yards. I really like Josh Kelly. I really like Caleb Douglas, and I think they're going to help this offense a ton, but I think Hudson is the difference maker. I think he's the guy that, they brought him in to be one of the best wide receivers they've had there in a very long time. There was no doubt about it. They brought this guy in to be an absolute game changer from day one, and I think he's going to be that. He's a very, very good enemy route runner wherever you put him on the field, and I think that's what Baron Morton needs. He's not necessarily going to be a guy that, fits balls into really, really tight windows or does anything incredible in the pocket, but he's absolutely someone that can put the ball where it needs to be as long as you get some separation, and this guy can get plenty of separation, that's for sure. So I think this is someone that kind of opens up Texas Tech's offense and absolutely is someone that, you brought in to be an elite player. You brought in to be maybe the best receiver you've had since Michael Crabtree. So let's get off running, and I definitely think he's someone that can do that and just be an absolute menace among a lot of these defenses in this conference. So absolutely love this kid, and I think he's going to make quite the mark for the Red Raiders this upcoming season. West Virginia is really, really fascinating to me, but at the end of the day, I think they're going to be fighting to make a bowl game at the end of the year, and it's not necessarily about how good this team is. I frankly think they're a really good team. I just think their schedule to start the year is an absolute gauntlet. They start with Penn State, obviously, which is a very, very tough game. Likely a loss at this point, the way I look at it, but we'll see what happens as it kind of comes a little bit closer. And then you got Kansas, you got Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, and then Arizona to open the conference schedule. All of those in succession. That's an absolute nightmare. I don't know how they come out on top in the majority of those games, if I'm being totally honest. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch this team. I think they're a very dangerous team. I think they're a team that is going to be not easy to deal with for a lot of these other teams in the conference, but when you face all of the elite teams in the conference pretty much in a row, you're going to have a really tough time, and it's definitely going to cause some problems. They do dodge Utah, which is a big-time win, but it doesn't necessarily help things. Now, on the back end, you do have some doable games. You have Cincinnati, Baylor, UCF, Texas Tech. All of those games are games that they can absolutely win, but at the end of the day, they might have to win all 4 of those games to get to 6 wins, because there's a reality where they lose to Penn State, they lose to Kansas, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Kansas State, and Arizona. That puts you at 6 losses already before you even go into really the tail end of their schedule. So there's going to be so much going into the season, and they're going to have to steal some of those games early on in the season if they really want to compete in this conference. But as I look at it right now, that 6-win marker might just be the spot that they want to land at this upcoming year, because the schedule is just an absolute nightmare, especially to start. But let's move on to TCU and finish it out here with Cam Cook. And I think he's someone that is going to make an All-American, not an All-American team, an All-Big 12 team. I think that's how good this kid is, and it's going to be incredibly tough for him to do that. There are some dudes at running back in the Big 12, whether it's Ollie Gordon, Taj Brooks, RJ Harvey, Devin Neal, Penny Boone, whoever you want to pick. There's a million guys that he's going to have to pass up to do this, but frankly, I think he has a big-time opening, and I think this offense is just going to lean on him really aggressively. They brought in some big-time transfers at offensive line after it was not a good year on offensive line a year ago, and they brought in 4 new guys. They'll obviously have to get them to gel, but I think they got a ton better on that in that specific position room. And I think when you talk about this offense this upcoming year, Josh Hoover is a fine player. He's a good passer and definitely someone that can move the ball down the field, but they're going to have to run the ball, and they're going to have to be very aggressive in that, and I think that's what Sonny Dykes wants to do. When you look back at that 2022 season, obviously Max Duggan made plenty of plays through the air, but there were some guys in the backfield that absolutely made that a lot easier for him to do. So Sonny Dykes, if he's going to open up this offense, it's going to start with the run game, and it's going to start with Cam Cook. So I frankly think he's a guy that, he got injured last year, wasn't able to really show who he is. I think this is the year where he really comes onto the scene and just absolutely explodes. I don't know who he beats out for those spots in the All Big 12 team. I don't know if it's RJ Harvey or it's Devin Neal. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think Cam Cook is one of those guys that is super, super dangerous. And you might not know the name now, but you absolutely will by the end of the season. But at the end of the day, the Big 12 is one of the most craziest conferences in this upcoming year. One of those that you just cannot get a beat on for the life of you. So it's going to be really hard to pick to figure out, who do I want in my championship, which if anyone does not know, next week will be all about predictions. We will break down every single conference. We'll get into the playoff picture, the Heisman. I'll break down everything that we need to break down in next week's shows. But at the end of the day, this is a conference that I might just have to really sit down and use my full brain power for, because it's going to be incredibly tough to pick and going to be one of those that is going to come down to the wire, and there's about 10 teams that absolutely could be in that conversation. So it's going to be awesome to watch, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.